Hey everyone, my name is Roy, and in today's recording I'll be showing how you can query popular SaaS APIs using GraphQL and how we can request this GraphQL API using a React Next.js application. So our starting point is StepZen GraphQL Studio, in which you can query multiple SaaS APIs using GraphQL. If you scroll to the list at graphql.stepzen.com, you can find an example Airtable, Practical Dev, and GitHub. So today we'll be combining both the GitHub API and the Practical Dev API. And as you can see, it already generates some queries for us, which I can run using this button, or I can also toggle this button to use mock data or real data. So let's start by not using real data, but mock data instead. You can see these queries are still being populated for the mock data. If I run them, in example the top one, which combines information from DevTo and GitHub, you can see data has been mocked and returned for us. But instead of the followers, I actually want to return the repositories for this mock data. And then next to an ID, I also want a name. Running this will still mock our data, so nothing actual real will be happening in terms of connecting with the GitHub API. But instead what's happening, it takes the schema from the GitHub API and the Practical Dev API and mocks the data based on the fields and the possible queries. If I copy paste this URL, I can use them from my next React application. And if I'll be going to VS Code, we'll be creating the next application right here by running npx create next app, and then a prompt to ask us how to name our project. And let's just go by the default my app. So now it will install React and Next.js by getting all the packages and dependencies in there. And if you're not familiar with Next.js yet, it's a pretty cool web framework to build React applications. You don't have to think about routing or how to fetch your data. An example to do server-side request, which we'll be doing later on, because Next.js had methods for all these different things. So now I can just go cd into my app, and from there run yarn dev. So this will start a development server, which I can find on localhost port 3000, as I already opened here. Refresh it to get the Next.js sample application loaded in there. So this might take some time depending on the speed of your machine. And here you can see the page being loaded. So it has a sample header and then some information about learning with Next.js. But instead of displaying this, I actually want to use my data from StepZen GraphQL Studio. So let's go back to my code, go into my app, and as I said, it's using the file system for routing. So if I go to pages, I'll find a file called index.js, which will hold the sample application. And through here, I can do a server-side request to my GraphQL API. Pressing export function, and then this method is called getServerSide props. And from here, the only thing I need to do is return props. And of course, later on, add some data for the props. But the props I return here are available from my component, which is rendered on the client side. And here I can just do props. The second part of this is actually getting the data from my GraphQL API, for which I'll be going back to Studio and copy paste this endpoint here, which is the endpoint to which my mocked schemas have been deployed. Back to my app, and in here I'll make sure to use a async function, as I will be using fetch to get the data from my GraphQL API. Here, let's do const data is await, then my fetch request, which is going to this endpoint. Use some quotes, and then from there I want to return the JSON response. That's JSON, format document. And then, of course, besides just providing the endpoint, we also need to set some additional things. As GraphQL is only working with post requests, we should set the method to post. Also supply a header, so our fetch request will make sure that we actually get JSON instead of anything else as a response. Let's do headers. Let's set content type, which should be application JSON. And then besides the method and the header, of course, we should set a body, which will be our GraphQL query. And for this, we need to make sure we stringify this return, so it will be sent to the API properly. So use json.stringify. And here, of course, we can use a JSON object. Call this one query. Open some quotes, and then go back to Studio where we can copy this query and then just paste it in here. Format the page again. So now it will go to my endpoint created in GraphQL Studio using a post method with the correct headers and also my query. And then the data that is returned, it should be placed within our props. So we can do this thing, just spread them around and wait till it compiles. If we go back to our next app, nothing has changed because we're not using the data yet. But whenever you refresh this page, it will do a server-side request to our GraphQL API, which of course you won't be seeing in the network tab as it is a server-side request. If we go back, the data from our GraphQL API has been put on the props. So from here, an example, I can say, welcome, and then an example, get the name of the user. Try props, use some conditional formatting in there, actually props, and then devto get user, props, data, of course, and then devto get user. And then in here we have a name. Dot name. So if we will be saving this, we should be seeing the username in our next application. And this is, of course, the mock data. Let's try and also put the summary from devto in there, which we can do here. So instead of name, we'll be using summary. See what it looks like. Yeah. So both these fields are now being mocked. So the username from devto and also the summary. And then the third thing I want to do here is also display our repositories. For this, I'll be using the already existing grid. And instead of the get user, I should get repositories. Repositories. See, use some conditional formatting here as well. And see what the format is like. So we have edges, node, and then some fields. Let's go to edges, and for matter, I already know edges should be an array. So we should also check for the length of this array and make sure it's larger than 0 so that we don't try to map over fields that are non-existing. This, then of course do a map here, which we can already destructure the value for node. Then the data that we'll be returning can be placed inside one of these blocks that were already there. Let's get rid of the href as we're not using it. We should add a key, otherwise we cannot create an iterative way of rendering components in React. For this we can use node.id. And then let's replace this thing with the node.name, which will be the name of the mocked repository. Get rid of this field, and also let's get rid of all these blocks that we're not using. And then we let VS Code clean up our code a bit. And we should be able to see some mock data here, but unfortunately it isn't. So let's see what's going wrong. So we have devto get user, repositories, length, and then edges, which we'll be mapping over. We have edges, a node, repository. Always important to check if we don't make any mistakes. But I see I should search within GitHub details. Put it in between here. And then we should be all fine. Yeah, so now it's showing 2 mocked repositories for this mocked user from devto and GitHub. But then, of course, I want to show real data. So if we go back to StepZen Studio, you can just turn off the mocked function. And for this, we will need to add some new things to our field, to our query. So let's just copy paste this top part and go back here. We'll go to this part. You can see this has changed and this also has changed. Format the document. And you can see this query is now taking a variable or a query parameter, which is GitHub token, which of course we should supply. So below my query field, I should add a field called variables, which should take the value for GitHub token. Should be my GitHub token, of course. And to get a GitHub personal access token, you should visit your GitHub profile and find how to create a token there from a tab called Settings and then Developer. But of course, I've already created one for myself. So let's get them into the Next.js project. For this, I've created an environment file, which I should place inside the My App directory. And now it can be loaded by Next.js using the process.environment. And then I've named it GitHub token. Let's save this. It should automatically get this environment file. And also I should change the endpoint, which is also changed in Studio. So not only the queries changed, also the endpoint has changed. Of course, because there's a different schema now that's being deployed, one without any mock values. Let's replace this one as well, save it, and go back to our next application. As you can see, no data is being loaded just yet, as of course we need to make sure that all the fields are correctly in place. So we have the new endpoint, we have our query. Let's make sure our GitHub token is also there. For this, we might have to restart our Next.js application to be sure that this token is being loaded. And now I can see it loads my variable. And then if I would be going back to my front end, it should look a bit different here. And now, of course, it's saying, welcome, Lucia, which is my coworker, her bio from dev.to, and then also some repositories. So this is pretty cool. I've just created an application in Next.js and React using pre-built APIs in GraphQL. So for this, you can use StepZen GraphQL Studio. And from here, of course, you can click many other APIs, such as Airtable, and just add them all to your schema. And then, of course, if you want to take things a step further, you can actually take your GraphQL API and bring it locally with StepZen. So this one is now being maintained in StepZen GraphQL Studio. Instead, I can also do something different here and say StepZen import GraphQL, for which I'll need to deploy it with a GraphQL API endpoint. So to ask how to name our endpoint, let's do something random. It creates a StepZen configuration file. It downloads all the StepZen setup, and then to ask us about the endpoint. And we can just provide the endpoint I've copy-pasted from StepZen GraphQL Studio, and which is the endpoint we've already been using in our application. I don't want to add extra HTTP headers, and I don't want to set a prefix. And now it will start importing the schema that we were already using in our Next.js application to my local machine, from which I can then, of course, redeploy it and make sure to use StepZen to my own account instead of StepZen Studio. And this way I can modify the schema and add other things that I want to add. Maybe add your own database or add your own REST API. Or you can just go back to Studio and add more popular SaaS APIs. So while this thing is generating, I would like to ask you, and thank you for your time. So if you like this talk, make sure to subscribe to StepZen by using the subscribe button or like this video. And make sure to follow us on Twitter or go to our Discord if you have any questions. Thank you and hope to see you soon.